Hey everyone, I'm so glad that you joined us for this webinar. My name is Jason Allen with Oldcastle Infrastructure, and our topic today is shifting paradigms in a shifting world, how to recognize and overcome cognitive biases. So before we begin, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I currently live in Utah, and I'm a proud graduate of the University of Utah with bachelor's and master's degrees in civil engineering. I've been in the engineering industry for over 20 years. When I was 18 years old, I started surveying, and then I transitioned into drafting and design in land development. I then worked in the public sector as a county engineer and a public works director. I've also done consulting engineering work in roadway and drainage design for the Department of Transportation and large municipal projects. And now I'm a technical resource engineer or marketing engineer for Oldcastle Infrastructure. Now, some of you may not be familiar with Oldcastle Infrastructure, so I'll quickly share some of our solutions that we can provide. As I mentioned before, I currently live in Utah, and I spend a majority of my time providing technical resources to engineers in the Mountain West area. Now, most people know us by our precast products, mainly reinforced concrete pipe and precast box culverts. We also provide precast manholes and catch basins. Now, while this has been our bread and butter for many years, we have added some really cool new product lines to help meet your needs. Oldcastle recently acquired Torrent Resources, a company out of California that is the industry leader in dry well manufacturing and installation. We've also expanded our stormwater solutions to include Storm Capture, a total stormwater management system that uses precast sections for underground detention storage. Now, this system uses the strength of reinforced concrete to provide more area for storage, which drastically reduces the footprint compared to other underground detention systems. We also have multiple stormwater treatment system options like sediment traps or hydrodynamic separators that can meet your specific needs and treatment requirements. And our newest addition in the Utah market is gasketed box culvert. Now, instead of your typical soil type mastic joints, we now have the ability to manufacture gasketed box culverts to provide a watertight joint without any additional joint treatment, which saves time and money on installation. Okay. So we're going to kick off this presentation with a little game. Now, typically when I give this presentation in person, I would play this game with members of the audience. But since this is a webinar, we're going to watch a video of people playing this game. So enjoy.
I'm going to give you guys three numbers, a three-number sequence, and I have a rule in mind that these three numbers obey. And I want you to try to figure out what that rule is. But the way that you can get information is by proposing your own set of three numbers to which I will say, yes, that follows my rule, or no, it doesn't follow my rule, and then you can propose what you think the rule is. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so here are the three numbers. 2, 4, 8.
2, 4, 8.
You don't need to continue the sequence, you can propose a totally different sequence, whatever you want to propose, and I will simply say yes or no, that follows my rule.
2, 4, 8. 16, 32.
16, 32, and
64.
Those also follow my rule.
Okay.
What's the rule? What are you thinking?
Multiply by 2.
That is not my rule.
What?
That's not my rule. But you're allowed, if you want, propose three other numbers.
3, 6, 12.
3, 6, 12.
3, 6, 12 follows my rule.
10, 20, 40.
10, 20, 40.
That follows the rule.
Yeah, I'm still multiplying by 2.
I know.
Oh.
I know what you're doing. And yes, it follows my rule, but no, it's not my rule.
5, 10,
10 and 20.
Follows my rule.
100,
200, 400.
Follows my rule.
500, 1,000, 2,000.
Follows my rule.
Want me to keep going?
But do I just keep going? You're going to tell me your rule?
Am I doing it the wrong way? Am I approaching this the wrong way?
You're totally fine,
Okay.
but you're approaching it the way most people approach it. Like, think strategically about this. You want information.
Yeah.
I have information. The point of the three numbers, right, is to allow you to figure out what the rule is.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to give you the numbers that I don't think fits the sequence and then see what you say. So I'll say 2, 4, 7.
Fits my rule.
So whatever I propose is right?
So is your rule like you can propose any number?
So the rule is anything we say is yes.
No.
Damn it.
But you are on the right track now. Hit me with three numbers.
3, 6, 9.
Follows my rule.
Oh, that didn't follow my rule.
This is good, right?
5, 10, 15.
That follows my rule.
What? Oh. Really?
Yeah.
I don't believe this.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Follows the rule.
What about 789?
Follows. Yes, that follows the rule.
8, 16, 39.
Fits the rule.
Excellent.
But we're no closer to the rule. I want you to get to the rule.
How about 1, 7, 13?
Follows the rule.
What?
11, 12, 13.
How does this
Follows
make
the rule.
sense?
10,
I don't
9,
know how to
8.
do this.
Does not follow the rule.
10, 9, 8 does not.
Oh, so is it all in ascending order?
Booyah.
Okay.
Up top. Yes, first
that
ones
what it
to get
is?
it. You guys nailed it. That's the rule. That's
all
the
it
rule. Increase numbers in increasing order.
Aw.
Numbers in ascending order.
Oh, so much.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 15, 25. Doesn't matter. Any numbers in ascending order.
Now, this little game and example is inspired by the book The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. Now, I recently read that book, and it was an awesome read. Pretty intense, but it was awesome. Now, The Black Swan is a metaphor for the unknown and the unexpected. So The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb investigates the existence of the following three things. Number one, there is a disproportionate role of high-profile, hard-to-predict, and rare events that are beyond the realm of normal expectations in history, science, finance, and technology. Number two, there is a non-computability of the probability of consequential rare events using scientific methods, mainly because there are such small probabilities we're dealing with that it's hard to predict that. And the third, and arguably the most interesting for me that I found in the book, was the psychological biases that bind people, or that blind people, both individually and collectively, to uncertainty and a rare event's massive role in historical affairs. Okay, so I understand that that was an extremely intense, very academic summary of the book. So I'm going to simplify it here in a way that we can use in our day-to-day lives. All right. In the old world, the theory was that all swans were white. So for every instance of a white swan, people would think, oh, we're correct. That's a correct theory. Swans are white. However, you cannot prove a theory to be true. So when people founded Australia, they realized, oh my gosh, there exist black swans, which completely disproved their theory and changed their way of thinking. Now, what's interesting to me is that in that number rule game that we showed, people came up with a rule very early on and then only proposed numbers that fit within that rule. Now, those that figured out the rule were only able to do so by coming up with a set of three numbers that did not meet their rule and did not meet his rule. However, their attachment to their own rule or their own theory caused them to be blinded. Now, these psychological biases that blind people, both individually and collectively, are sometimes called cognitive biases. There are dozens of cognitive biases in psychology, but I want to discuss some of the more common ones. And these are some of my favorite ones as well. All right. We're going to talk about confirmation bias, loss aversion, gambler's fallacy, availability cascade, framing effect, bandwagon effect, and my personal favorite, the Dunning-Kruger effect. All right. Now, let's start with confirmation bias. This is actually the most common cognitive bias, and this is the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories. All right, so think about the swan theory, right? The black swan theory. You've got all of these people assume that swans are only white. So every time they see a white swan, it just confirms that bias. It confirms that idea that yes, all swans are white. It isn't until they saw something wrong with that theory that they were able to divest from that way of thinking. All right. Also think of the number game. The confirmation was anytime they gave three new numbers that met their original theory, it affirmed and strengthened that theory. And so they held on to it tighter and tighter. And so it's a fascinating bias, and it happens so much in our day-to-day lives. Okay, the second one is loss aversion. Now, loss aversion is a cognitive bias wherein it's the tendency to prefer avoiding losses as opposed to acquiring equivalent gains. So, for example, this could affect us when we're taking risks, like maybe we're only investing in low return guaranteed investments instead of maybe more promising investments with a lot higher risk. Okay, so that's loss aversion. Then gambler's fallacy. This one's pretty interesting too. The gambler's fallacy is an erroneous belief that a random event is less likely or more likely to happen if the based on the results from a previous event. So, for instance, if you've done something, we see this like in movies and stuff all the time, and like in relationships and things, like where someone says, well, anytime I'm vulnerable, this person leaves me, so I'm never gonna, be vulnerable and say that I love them or whatever. That we see that sometimes in our day-to-day life, right? Where based on what's happened in the past, it's always gone this way. So we just assume that anytime we do that, it's going to continue to be that way. All right. The fourth one, availability cascade. Oh, this one fascinates me so much. This one is really popular today based on the media and the way things are portrayed in the media. All right. So availability cascade is a self-reinforcing cycle that explains the development of certain kinds of collective beliefs. All right. So let's take climate change for an example. That seems to be a nothing that's going to tear anybody apart here and cause any hurt feelings here. So let's say you have news station A, and news station A continues to say that climate change doesn't exist. It's not real. It's natural progress of the planet. It's just the cycles that we're going through. It's not man-made. It's not a problem. Don't worry about it. And if you're watching news station A and only news station A, that's all you ever hear. That's all the information that's available to you. So as you're listening to this, you come to the conclusion that, yeah, the only thing I'm ever hearing about this is that it's made up and it's not a problem. Meanwhile, news station B is telling you that climate change is real. It is made by man. It is our fault. It's the single biggest problem facing humanity right now. And they continue to have scientists and people on their programs. And the information that they provide that is available to you is that of doom and gloom, and that climate change is going to kill us all. But because that's the only news station you're listening to, and you never go out of your way to hear a different opinion, that's what you believe. And so those that listen to news station A believe it's not an issue. Those that listen to news station B believe it is an issue. And when they talk to each other, they can't believe how the other person doesn't see it their way. Well, it's just because of the information that's available to you and to them. So that's the availability cascade. All right. So the next one is the framing effect. And this is a cognitive bias where people decide on options based on whether the options are presented in a positive or negative way. So this happens a lot like in the newspapers and news media. Two different news outlets could be giving the exact same story. However, depending on how they frame it, right? If one news station is pro climate change and one is against climate change, they don't believe in it, then they're going to tell the same story, but they're going to tell that with a different slant, right? So however they're slanting that is going to determine how their audience views whether it's negative or positive. This is also common in like movies, right? One of my favorite movies growing up was Star Wars. I love Star Wars, big fan. I mean, I can mention Darth Vader, and if you've seen Star Wars and you're a fan, you could probably hear the Imperial March in your head. Dun, 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 right? When that music played, we knew that was the bad guy. Okay, we knew Darth Vader was the bad guy because of the music and the way he was framed. We knew from the first moment he stepped on the screen, that's a bad guy, because that's scary music. That is intense, scary music. He's a bad guy. That's the framing effect, all right? The bandwagon effect. This is the tendency for people to adopt certain behaviors, styles, or attitudes simply because other people are also doing it. Right now, this is very typical in sports. Obviously, we hear that, oh, you jumped on the bandwagon. The team starts winning, and now all of a sudden everybody wants to be a fan of that team because everybody wants to be the fan of a winner, right? So they'll jump on the bandwagon. And but it's not just in sports. This could be in anything, really. Like it can affect our decisions on how we buy things, right? For instance, my son plays on a basketball team. Well, everybody on the basketball team has the new LeBrons, so of course he has to have the new LeBrons, right? Everybody's got to have LeBrons on the basketball team because everybody's doing it. We've got to do that, or nobody's doing it, so we don't want it, right? Another one like phones, right? We have all these people. All my friends love their iPhones. That's all they talk about is their iPhone. So my next phone is definitely going to be an iPhone, right? That's the bandwagon effect. Everybody's doing something, or nobody's doing something. So we're either going to jump on board or we're going to avoid something. Okay. Now, the last one I'm going to talk about here is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, as I mentioned, this is my favorite one. This one fascinates me to no end. All right. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias whereby people with low ability, expertise, or experience regarding a certain type of task or an area of knowledge, they tend to overestimate their ability or their knowledge, right? Conversely, people with an extremely high ability or expertise or experience regarding a certain type of task or area of knowledge, they tend to underestimate their ability or knowledge. Okay. Now this may seem kind of confusing, and so I'm gonna share with you an example from when I was in high school. So when I was in high school, I had this friend who he played guitar, and he was an amazing guitarist. I mean, he played guitar for years. I remember in 7th grade he got his first guitar and he started playing. He'd play like Nirvana and all these songs, and I was like, this is amazing, this is so cool. And I watched as he got better and better at guitar. And so by the time we were like juniors in high school, he was the best guitarist I'd ever seen. And the kid was just amazing. He could shred. He could do all these amazing things on guitar. So he ended up dropping out of high school and just played guitar for like 8 hours a day. Like that was his life. It consumed him. But before he dropped out, he was telling me about the different levels of guitar playing. And he said there are 3 levels of guitar playing. He said there's Chuck Berry, Eric Clapton, and Jimi Hendrix. And I said, well, you're the best guitarist I've ever heard. What level are you? And he said, I don't know, probably somewhere between Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix. And I said, wow, that's pretty impressive. So I see him a year later. He's dropped out of school. He's played guitar like 8 hours a day. This kid is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Best guitarist around. And I said, hey, I talked to you a year ago. You said you were somewhere between Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix. So where are you now? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, Jason, when you get to the Jimi Hendrix level, you realize there are 5 other levels before you become an expert. And I said, where are you? He's like, I'm on the first level. I am nowhere near an expert. I had no idea how much I still have to learn. So, that's that Dunning-Kruger effect. The better he got at playing guitar, the more he realized how much he had to learn and how much he had to grow before he was a true expert. Right? When you learn so much about a topic, you start realizing how little you actually know about that topic. So my advice with Dunning-Kruger in mind is if you ever meet somebody and they tell you they're an expert at anything, be a little hesitant, be leery, because if someone says that they're an expert, chances are they don't have the information enough and enough knowledge in that subject to actually realize what it takes to be an expert. So just keep that in mind. All right. So in order to overcome these cognitive biases, we need a paradigm shift. So a paradigm is a typical example or a pattern of something or a model that we tend to follow. All right. But a paradigm shift is a change in approach or underlying assumptions. It's also an important change that happens when the usual way of thinking about or doing something is replaced by a new and different way. Now, we make assumptions and judgments every day. That's how we're wired to operate, and it's actually necessary for us to function in our day-to-day lives, okay? The problem isn't making assumptions. The problem is when we perceive those assumptions to be facts, all right? That's what causes our cognitive biases. Now, one of the best examples that I've ever heard of a paradigm shift is found in the story of Abraham Wald, okay? So this is a picture of Abraham Wald. Abraham Wald was born in Austria-Hungary in 1902, and he was of Jewish descent. And when he went to school, he loved mathematics. He studied mathematics and statistics, and he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant at mathematics. He graduated in 1933. Now, think back to world history and think about what was going on in the Germanic countries, all those countries around Germany in the 1930s, and what would happen to someone who was Jewish. Probably not the best place to be growing up and being raised. So he actually left and came to the United States, moved to Colorado Springs, and continued his studies and his research. Okay. He was actually invited to come to New York, to Columbia University, to study. Okay. And during World War II, Wald was a member of the Statistical Research Group, or the SRG. at Columbia University, where he applied his statistical skills to various wartime problems. And the most famous and arguably the most valuable problem that he'd researched was examining the distribution of damage to Navy aircraft that were returning from missions. All right, so during World War II, the fighter planes were all manned by the Navy. Now, they realized that they needed to put armor on these planes to protect them. However, armoring a plane cost a lot of money, and it also made the planes heavy. So the more armor you put on a plane, the heavier it got, and the less chance it had of going on its mission and returning home because they didn't have enough fuel to get there because it was so heavy. Okay, so these were the problems that the Navy was dealing with. They knew that full armor was not an option, but they also knew that no armor at all was also not a viable option. So the Strategic Research Group, or the SRG, was looking for the optimal amount and location of armor for the aircraft. So the Navy at the time was evaluating all the planes that returned home from missions, and they looked at the locations with the most bullet holes to determine what is the best place to install this armor. So most of the planes had a lot of bullet holes on the wings and the tail and in certain areas of the fuselage. But so as the Navy's looking at this, they begin placing armor in these locations to protect from bullets. They'd say, well, this is where we're getting the most bullet fire. We got to protect those areas. Okay. However, there was a bit of a contradiction here, because as they'd send out planes for missions, they continued to lose the same amount of planes. So they would send these planes out with more armor. They'd come back. Planes would come back with bullet holes in the same spot where the armor was, and they would lose the same number of planes. And they thought, what the heck is going on here? So they noticed these same patterns. They put more armor on. Well, maybe we need more armor in these locations. So they'd put more armors on. They'd send them out on the next mission, and then they'd lose more planes. And the Navy at this point is just scratching their heads, saying, what in the world is going on here? So Abraham Wald and the SRG noticed something that the Navy missed. All right. Now, instead of looking at the locations of the greatest concentration of bullets, Abraham Wald started looking at the locations of the least number of bullet holes. All right. Because Wald realized something. He realized that the planes that returned home with bullet holes, they were still able to fly. Okay, even though they sustained heavy bullet fire in certain locations of the plane. So he came up with this theory that the locations where there were no bullet holes, for instance, in the cockpit and the engines, right, in the fuel tanks, these locations, right, these were critical locations. And the only reason that any planes returned home with bullet holes were because they hadn't been hit in these critical locations. So in his own words, Abraham Wald said the following: the extra armor belonged not on the part of the plane that could survive a lot of bullets, but to the part of the plane that could not. So by providing armor in the locations that could not sustain bullet fire, the cockpit, the engines, the fuel tanks, the Navy was able to save more fighter planes and keep their pilots safe during their missions. So this cognitive bias is called survivorship bias or immortal time bias, right? This is the logical error of concentrating on the people or things that made it past some selection process while simultaneously overlooking those that did not, typically because of their lack of visibility, right? So prior to the SRG's involvement, the Navy was focusing on the planes that returned and the location of the bullet holes because that's what they could see in front of them. That was what was right in front of them. It's the easiest thing to see. And they made this survivorship bias saying, well, those planes survived and they have all these bullets. That's where we need to put the armor. All right. But Abraham Wald's brilliance came in his ability to visualize the planes that didn't return and develop a conclusion as to why. Why were they not returning? Now, overcoming this cognitive bias, the survivorship bias, not only saved countless lives, but it potentially turned the tide of World War II. Okay, so by nature, these cognitive biases, they seem counterintuitive to our own logical reasoning. All right. Now, one of my favorite Christmas movies is Miracle on 34th Street, the 1947 classic, Miracle on 34th Street. All right. I love this movie so much. Okay. In this movie, the New York-based department store Macy's hires a man named Kris Kringle to play Santa Claus during the Christmas shopping season. All right. So all these people are coming in to see Santa Claus, and these kids are coming in to tell him what they want. And now Chris ignored the instructions from the toy department head. His name was Mr. Shellhammer. And Mr. Shellhammer was recommending that he was telling him to recommend overstocked items to undecided shoppers. So if someone comes in, they don't know what they want. Here's a list of all of these items that we should be pushing so that we could sell these products that are overstocked. However, Chris ignored that, and he directed one woman to another store, their competitor. He said, go to there in order to fulfill her son's Christmas request. He wanted a truck. She said, Macy's doesn't have it. And he said, you can get it over there across town at this other store. Now, this blew her away. She was so impressed by Chris's honesty and helpfulness that she went up and found Mr. Shellhammer and informed him that while she's never been a fan of Macy's, she's now going to become a loyal Macy's customer. All right. As a result, this became Macy's policy to help customers find what they want as opposed to pushing unwanted items. Now, this seems counterintuitive, right? I mean, think about it. How could recommending their competitor to customers help them sell more products? That doesn't make any sense. But their business increased over time as a result of customer trust and loyalty. That's what really mattered in this case. Okay. So now we're going to look at a real-life cognitive bias case study, and it's one that seems to be impacting multiple industries across the United States. All right. I call this one, no one wants to work anymore. All right. Over the past year and a half, I'm sure we've all had the opportunity to see a sign like this, whether it's been at a restaurant or some other service thing that we've been to, some other business. We've all seen these things pop up, whether it's online or even in person. I've seen them in person, seen them online. These are everywhere, right? We are short-staffed. Please be patient with the staff that did show up. No one wants to work anymore. Management, right? We've seen these everywhere. So let's analyze by discussing what we see when we notice this sign, all right? So here's what we see. We could see that employee retention is near impossible, and not just in the fast food industry, right? We're seeing that in our industry as well. We can also see from this sign that they are offering a competitive salary, $12 an hour paid weekly. That is way more than I made when I was a kid. And so seems to be that they're being competitive with their salary. Well, we can also see that this is at the very least consistent with their past methods, with what they've done in the past, if not better than what they've done in the past. It could be more money than they've offered. And now that they're paying weekly, that could be better than what they've offered in the past. So we can infer right from this that the company is using all the same methods to find and hire staff as they have in the past. All right. So that's what we see. Now, when we see this sign, or when we're put in a similar situation of trying to hire and retain employees, our minds start making assumptions. So here are some examples of what we assume. All right. First off, young people don't work as hard as they used to and are generally unreliable, right? We also assume that we, as employers, are doing everything that we can. We also erroneously assume that what we did in the past is still going to work. You remember that gambler's fallacy, cognitive bias, anyone? Right? Doing the same thing over and over is going to produce the same exact results? Not always. Not when the world changes and things shift. So as we continue to dwell on these first three assumptions, right, and we're refusing to accept that maybe we are the problem, we come to the next assumption, which is a dangerous generalization that people are lazy and they're just looking for handouts, right? All of these help us to come to the conclusion that no one wants to work anymore, right? That's the conclusion we come to. But if we take a minute and step away from these potentially harmful assumptions, right? They're not productive. They're not helping us grow and develop and solve our problem, right? We could start to focus on things that we know, all right? We looked at what we see. We looked at what we assume. Let's talk about what we know. Here's what we know. In February of 2020, the unemployment rate was 3.5%. Okay. That's right before the COVID-19 pandemic shut down businesses across America. 3.5% unemployment rate pre-COVID. On December 31st, 2022, the unemployment rate was 3.5%, the same as it was pre-pandemic. So our assumption that people are just sitting at home waiting on checks from the government is probably not accurate. All right. We also know that younger generations, right, the millennials and the Gen Z, they have such different values than the previous generations, right? They hold different things in high regard and high esteem than previous generations did. For example, where baby boomers were driven by stability and wages, right? These younger generations are driven by fulfilling a higher purpose and feeling like what they do matters, all right? We also know that what we've been doing is not working now. Doing what we've always done is not working. If we continue to try to hire and incentivize people the same way we always have, it's not going to work. That's what we know. We know that because we're not producing the results. We're not getting the results we want. It's not working. All right. That's what we know. All right. So the point of discussing this case study wasn't to solve the problem of no one wants to work anymore. Okay. That's, I mean, much smarter people than me are going to need to get together and kind of figure this whole thing out. All right. But instead of trying to solve it, the whole point of this exercise in this case study was to understand that sometimes our assumptions can lead us down a wrong path. All right. While cognitive biases can be unconscious, there are a number of things we can do to reduce their likelihood. All right. A lot of times these things just happen automatically. But if we can listen to some of these things that I'm going to tell you, I've got 10 things that you can do that are going to help you overcome these cognitive biases and help you be able to step away from these dangerous assumptions. All right. So here's 10 tips to overcome cognitive biases. Number 1, be aware and acknowledge biases. The first tip to overcome these biases is to acknowledge that they exist. When we know that there are factors that can alter the way we see things, we are so much more likely to be careful as we form judgments and make our decisions. All right, number 2, consider current factors that may be influencing your decision. Okay, ask yourself the following. Is there anything in the current situation that could lead me to feel overconfident in my convictions? And what about something that may cause me to ignore certain information? You need to be careful to make sure that you do not fall victim to the bandwagon effect because everybody's doing it, so I'm going to do it, or adopt attitudes simply because other people are doing that or feeling that way or thinking that way. All right. So number 3, reflect on the past, but don't dwell on it and don't assume it's a template for how we should work, right? That's no one really wants to work anymore bias, right? That's it. Reflect on the past. Look for patterns in how you've perceived situations in the past and where you might have made some mistakes. All right. For example, maybe you see that you tend to ignore facts, or maybe you overemphasize intuition, right? Then simply lean into opportunities to further explore data that's presented to you, right? Don't run away from it. Lean into it. Okay. Number 4, be curious. I love this one. Right? Being curious can help us to avoid cognitive biases. Okay. Curiosity can help us pause long enough to ask questions, even difficult ones. We have to ask those difficult questions to be able to grow and develop, right? Being curious stops us from assuming that we're always right. Okay. Number 5, strive for a growth mindset. People with a growth mindset believe that cognitive ability can be developed and tend to learn from criticism. Listen, none of us want to be criticized. None of us want to be told we're doing something wrong. But those with a positive growth mindset, they learn from it. They want to be better, right? Rather than covering up mistakes, they see them as an opportunity to learn and grow. They don't believe that factors are fixed or unchangeable, right? Cognitive bias modification is possible, but it takes work and it takes effort. Right? A growth mindset is one of many heuristics that can help move you in the right direction. All right. Number 6, identify what makes you uncomfortable. All right. Think about this for just 1 second. All right. Think about this. Are there people or situations that just rub you the wrong way? All right. Think about it. Now, I want you to ask yourself, what is it that makes you respond this way? Why do they rub you the wrong way? Is it possible, right? Is it possible that you have a bias that's impacting your perspective? Take a self-evaluation and identify those things that make you uncomfortable. All right. Number 7, embrace the opposite. Trying to understand an issue from both sides can make you a much stronger critical thinker, and it can help you see the world with more empathy, right? That's what we need, is more empathy. Okay, push yourself to believe the opposite of your initial reaction and pay attention to what happens. All right, number 8, seek multiple perspectives. Solicit feedback and perspectives from other people. Asking others for their input can help us find potential blind spots and stop us from being overconfident, right? That overconfidence is the enemy of curiosity and the enemy of growth and development, right? Do you remember that Dunning-Kruger effect that we talked about with the guitar, right? And the guitar player and not like realizing how far away he was from being an expert. Okay, asking other people to poke holes in your idea or your theory can help you overcome this bias. So seek multiple perspectives and be willing to listen to what they have to say. All right, number 9, look for disconfirming evidence. All right, go out of your way to seek out information that runs counter to your existing belief. All right, just like in the number game. Think back to that number game that we did at the beginning. All right, we cannot grow and develop if we're only looking for information that affirms our initial theories or ideas. Okay, we have to challenge the status quo, and we have to try to gather as much information as possible to make sure that we're making the right decisions here. Okay, and number 10, the last one, practice intellectual humility. Intellectual humility is about remaining open-minded to the idea that you might be wrong. And I know that's tough. That's hard to hear. I hate hearing that I'm wrong. I hate coming to the conclusion, oh my gosh, I was wrong, right? But rather than blindly standing by our convictions, it's about asking, what am I missing here? What am I not seeing? Now, this one might be the absolute most difficult of all of those 10 tips to overcome cognitive biases. But I'm going to tell you right now, it can also end up being the most rewarding. Practice intellectual humility. All right. So those are the 10 tips to overcome cognitive biases. Okay, thank you again for taking part in this webinar. I hope you find it helpful as you look for ways to challenge your current way of thinking. I hope that you're able to implement some of these tips as you work to shift all of your paradigms. All right. So for more information about this topic or any Oldcastle products discussed in this presentation, please email me at jason.allen@oldcastle.com or visit oldcastleinfrastructure.com.